Hey everybody, welcome back to the Podcast Digest. My name's Dan Lizette. Thank you guys very much for taking the time to listen. It has been a great last several weeks here at the Podcast Digest. I know many of you have heard last week's episode with Brian Koppelman. I was very proud of that episode and so happy to hear that you guys enjoyed it as well. But for this week's show, it was also another highlight for me and the show in its first year. My guest this week was a gentleman by the name of Taylor Martin. A little bit of background on Taylor. Back on episode 32, I spoke with Michael Fisher from Pocket Now. During that conversation, if you guys listened to that or recall the details, I talked about how Michael had an interaction with Taylor when Taylor Martin was a part of Pocket Now and on that show, and how he was in the process of sort of recreating the great interaction he had with Taylor with another co-host. Well, Taylor left Pocket Now in 2014, I believe, and has since been going it alone. In an entrepreneurial spirit, has started his own business, has relocated from his prior location up to basically a neighbor of mine. He's a couple of towns over, and when I saw his relocation here to southeastern Pennsylvania, I knew I wanted to reach out to him and get him on the Podcast Digest. What was even better was that Taylor agreed to join me here in my studio, which means my basement, and we had a great conversation in person. As a big fan of Taylor's work for a number of years, it was a real privilege to be able to meet him in person, have what I think was a great conversation. We cover all kinds of things, from his experience as a technology journalist to his current efforts with Mod, his company and his subscription service he's offering monthly now, and it is an amazing story. We talk about the entrepreneurial spirit that he's got, what it's like being an internet personality as he kind of dealt with a lot of the trolls and the negativity that are so often found, especially on places like YouTube and Twitter and so on and so forth. He's a super smart guy. It was a really cool conversation, and I think you'll enjoy this one. And let me know. Folks, thanks for listening, and let's get right to Taylor Martin. And folks, again, welcome back to the Podcast Digest. As I mentioned up front, my guest this week is Taylor Martin from the Untethered Podcast and so many other things that we'll be talking to him about. And this is actually a very special episode of the Podcast Digest. For the first time ever in the history of the show, I have convinced Taylor to join me in quote-unquote studio, which means he's here in my basement with me. Taylor Martin, welcome to the Podcast Digest.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thanks for making the trip. Some months ago, as folks who are fans of Taylor tuning in realized, he relocated to Pennsylvania, and come to find out, I realized he was just down the road from me. So I reached out to him and said, hey, we should get together and podcast, and he is here today. For anybody who's listening, though, that isn't already a Taylor Martin fan, can you tell them a little bit about yourself, what you do, and why you're here?
Well, I do a lot of things. I don't even know where to begin. I guess, obviously, I podcast because that's why I'm here, but I started with mobile technology back in 2008, 2009, working for a website called Phone Dog. Working just mainly with BlackBerries, or Blackberries. It was BlackBerry Dog, that was the website I worked for. But I covered BlackBerry news and reviews, just, the typical thing that a technology reviewer does, but just for BlackBerry, so it was a lot less interesting back then. But then I went to Phone Dog, covered mostly all phones and tablets and things, and then I went to Pocket Now, and I guess that's where I kind of found my home for the last 2.5 years, minus the last 6 months, I guess. So 2 years. I was there for about 2 years. But yeah, and now I do technology and, I guess, DIY videos on my own YouTube channel. It's called Mod. And the point was I left Pocket Now, and I wanted to do my own thing. And I was always kind of a builder, a maker. I built all kinds of random things. When I was a kid, I made the cabinets in my house that we used. I was 7 years old and made the cabinets that we used until I moved out and went to college. And then just always messing with things. My dad's an engineer, so I kind of picked up on a lot of things from him. But I wanted to do my own thing. That was what seemed to be the logical next step. And then now people are pulling me back. I don't want to say against my will, but I left technology, and then people just begged me to review phones again. So slightly, I guess, turning back towards that a little bit to cover a little more.
And that's a topic I know that you recently covered on your podcast, Untethered, and we're going to get into your career experience in technology as well and what you're doing now. But you have been on several podcasts, and you've got one live today that is your own. Tell folks about Untethered.
Untethered was kind of the brainchild of a few of my friends in the industry, because we always, like, outside technology and reviewing and writing and everything, we would always like gather up after all of us were done working and get on Xbox Live and play video games and just, I guess, talk about the most random things, and mostly not related to technology, because we're all wrapped up in technology. That's all we ever talk about. And then we had that one escape, and we had some of the funniest and best conversations we've ever had in that time that we were not talking about technology. And we thought, why not just record that and let, anybody who wants to listen to it in on that conversation. And we've gotten some really interesting topics, or hit some interesting topics in that time. But I mainly wanted to make it the place where any technology person could come and talk about anything but technology. So it's kind of a weird dynamic that we have, because we do talk about technology from time to time, but untethered means to, break from what you normally do. And I guess that, not technically, but that's what we meant for the podcast to be about, to talk about anything but what we normally talked about.
How about an audio camping trip?
Wow, that would be nice. Actually, Dustin said he wants to make a road trip and come here, and he's really big into camping. But my backyard now is so big we can just camp in the backyard.
I was going to just say that kind of seems like, what Untethered's goal was, right? The idea of kind of unplugging and talking about something else.
Okay, you didn't mean literally. Okay.
Well, you could make it literally. That
I guess so.
In a previous episode, I talked to Couple Things podcast, and I talked to them about an episode that they did where they podcasted in the car. They literally had 4 mics, 4 people, and 2 laptops, and they recorded a podcast in the car. So, it could work.
One of the best podcasts that I think we've ever had on Untethered was actually live. It was Michael Fisher, who you've had on before, Joshua Vergara from Android Authority, and myself sitting in a hotel room in Berlin. And we just put a mic right between us and just talked. And it was some of the most... It was kind of like a campfire discussion, right. Just laid back. And that's the whole atmosphere that we want, is laid back. We don't want anything to be forced. We don't want to talk about what we don't want to talk about.
And that was during a trip to IFA, right?
Yes. Yeah, that was September.
And technology was, if there's anybody listening right now, and I promise you there's several, that know your name and know where you came from, it was because of that, your role in the technology field, your coverage of these conferences, the videos that you made, the websites that you worked for, the articles that you wrote, so on and so forth. Tell folks first, before why you departed, why you got into that, how it felt being in it. I know I've heard you talk about some long days and such, but what's that world like for many of us, quote unquote, fans who've not worked in it?
Well, take all of the ideas that you have about it and throw them away. I don't want to make it sound terrible, but it's a lot more stressful and a lot less glamorous than a lot of people think it is. Because when I was at Pocket Now, every day, people would comment, mostly probably teenage males, would ask me, how can I work for you? Do you need an intern? How can I get a job with Pocket Now? And I actually still get that with Mod. People ask, how can I work for you? And I'm like, I barely make money. How are you going to make money? Like, if you want free labor, sure. But I think the internet and what you see and what we actually have to go through are 2 totally different things. And there are days where I love it. I do. And there are days where I just cannot stand it. And I think the balance is, I guess, taking those days that are great for everything they're worth, and just enjoying those and just kind of getting through the rough days. But most people think, when I worked in technology, most people thought it was a new phone comes, I play with the phone for several days, and then I make a video, and that video takes me 2-3 hours, and then I'm done, and I got an easy life. But in reality, it is You get a phone, you unbox it, there's one video. That video takes 2 or 3 hours. And then after that, you immediately go into comparing, taking notes, and making another video, which might take another 15 hours. And that's one day. That's one day of work. And that's a 15-hour day. And then every day after that is the same thing. You play with the phone a little bit, take as many notes as you can, and then spend the next 8 to 10 hours making another video. And, when you do that 6-7 days in a row, or sometimes 2 months in a row, it gets a little old. But then again, there are times when, like in Berlin, we fly. It's something that not everybody gets to experience. You get on a plane, you fly to a foreign country, and you get off, and all of your friends are there. Like, you have 30 friends on the ground in Berlin, and you're just roaming the city,
right?
Experiencing technology that's not out yet, and that's what makes it all worth it. Is the camaraderie.
Would you say that some of this is kind of, you don't want to know how the sausage is made, right? That concept that if you watch it and you enjoy it and you're a fan of it, you may think it's glamorous, but once you're actually in there doing it and producing it, they talk about this a lot with movies or sports broadcasts and things of that nature, that the real work behind the scenes isn't necessarily that glamorous. Is it sort of that element?
Very much so. And I don't mean to sound so glum and hateful towards it. I'm a little. It is real, yeah. And I'm a little cynical towards it because I've been doing it for so long, and I have been burned several times doing it. But I don't hold any grudges. It's just people don't see the hard work that goes into it, and a lot of the times it gets undermined. And I think my biggest gripe with this, and I don't want to sound like a complainer or anything, but the biggest gripe is that when you get in with a really large site, or even with broadcast or television or anything like that, you have entire teams doing the work. You have someone writing a script and appearing on camera. You have someone manning a camera, a different person manning the camera. You have someone else behind the audio, and then you have somebody editing. That is 5 or 6 separate jobs. When you're doing this and you're doing YouTube, it's all of that in one, and you cram it into one day.
Right.
And that can get tiring. But if you get into a groove, it's not so bad. Like yesterday, my groove yesterday was really on spot, and I made a video in 5 hours, and everybody seemed to like it. It was a little longer than I wanted, but it's not so bad. It could be worse.
And I want to talk about what you're doing now, but before I leave the technology field, one more thing that I don't think is talked about enough. And we talk a lot of people who I have seen approach you on Twitter or make comments or this, that, about your videos or about how great it was to be in the technology world because you had all the new phones or whatever. But what doesn't get discussed enough, I think, was your writing. I think your writing on Pocket Now stood on its own. I think it was always so much more. You had some huge pieces. Yeah. And I know you're not doing near as much as that anymore. What was writing like in the technology field? Was it one of your favorite parts, one of your least favorite parts? What was that process like?
Oh, first, thank you. That's a huge compliment because, to me, my writing has always just seemed like my writing. I write what comes to my head, and it just sounds like the way I speak.
Right.
And that's how I've always written. So it doesn't sound like it's just my thoughts, and that's how I've always seen it. But I miss it a lot, every day. I used to write for Todoist for a while, and that kind of filled the void for 6 months, 5 months, however long I did that. Mm-hmm. But I've switched to just doing videos for Todoist, and I miss it a lot. It was probably my favorite part because I could sit down and just write it out, just hammer on the keyboard for a little while, get my thoughts out, and then I didn't have to rant so much on podcasts and videos. And now I just have to rant just to get things off my chest. But yeah, it was my most favorite part.
Were you ever frustrated by the writing process? A few writers I've talked to who also do podcasts have most have felt that podcasting allows them to talk it out and give further explanation or clarification. Marco Arment famously has had some of his articles go viral and crazy where, on his podcast, he's kind of explained it out and those issues haven't. Did writing ever feel constraining due to its limit or its kind of fact that it would stick around in its form or anything like that? Do you ever feel that way or not so much?
Not necessarily. I felt like actually I could get more out and I could kind of articulate myself a little better than I could on a podcast, because podcast, you mess up, you say something stupid, and then there you are. You can always edit it out and post, but then, with my podcast, Untethered, I don't really edit anything out. That's kind of the point. It always has the explicit tag, and if you say something stupid, there it is. In writing, I could always edit myself in real time, and I don't know. I had total and complete control. I chose the topics. I could write about anything I wanted, and I miss that. I miss that outlet. I don't really have the ability to do that anymore.
Right. Short of starting your own blog.
Right. I mean, I could. But
Hypothetically.
Let's just add to the list I have of things I have to do.
So with Untethered being sort of the constant strain from the days in the big website and technology through to what you're doing now with the DIY stuff, Untethered was that constant, what I've termed sort of your running audio diary of your transition. Let's start here as we talk about what you're doing now. Why'd you ultimately leave?
I was kind of burned out.
Yeah.
I mean, I said that a lot, and I can't say too much about exactly what went down. The company sold. Pocket Now sold to a private company, and at that point, it sort of changed behind the scenes more so than on the front. It went from a bunch of dudes writing and making videos about technology who love technology to those dudes doing the same thing but being driven by revenue and profits, and it just changed the atmosphere behind the scenes a lot. And that happens a lot in this industry. Unfortunately, it does. And that wasn't ultimately what pushed me over the edge, but it was more that plus the work hours, and just I wasn't into it anymore. I would get a new phone, and normally just about anyone on the planet who got a brand new phone would be excited. And that moment for me was not excitement at all. It was, again.
Looked like a bunch of work in front of you.
Yeah, and that's all it was. Yeah. And now I can get a new phone, and I'm pretty excited about it. I missed that, and I could never get it again doing that. I knew that going in the same direction I was headed was not a good direction. So, and I've always wanted to work for myself. I just have. I've known that I struggle with, not authority, but I kind of like to be in charge sometimes, most of the time, usually. So being able to do what I want when I want, that sounds really like bratty of me, but that's what I wanted, so I took it.
So Mod at Home and Mod in a Box is what you went to when you became your own boss. How'd the idea come up? Was it something lingering in the back of your mind for years, or how was that process?
Well, Mod at Home was actually created while I was it's Mod. It's just Mod, but I have to use Mod at Home because Mod is such a broad word. It's taken everywhere on every platform. But I started Mod with my friend when I was actually at Pocket Now. Okay. I came to Pocket Now with an idea for a video, and they said that does not cater to our target demographic. We can't do it. And the idea was a Nexus 7 dash install in my car.
I remember this.
Yeah, and I was like, well, if you guys don't want me to do it, I'm going to create my own channel, and I'll just do stuff like this. And they were like, okay, whatever. So I created it with my roommate at the time, and then, I got busy because I started it at the worst time ever in like September, October of 2014, I believe. No, that was last year, 2013. Yeah, 2013. Yeah. And that's right around the time that you get into the holiday rush. Mm-hmm. So that happened, and then I didn't make the video until February, and then that's another rush after CES. So
I remember all of that. Yes.
So nothing ever happened, and then by the time we started making videos, my roommate got a job with Apple. They said, you can't make videos about technology on the internet, or you'll have to quit this job. One or the other. So he left, and then it just fell to the wayside, and it was there waiting for me, basically, to pick it up. And I basically wanted to turn Mod into anything and everything that I enjoyed. So not necessarily just DIY. It was never meant to be DIY. I did have a non-compete. So for several months, I couldn't talk about technology, really. And I could have broken that. I could have been a jerk. I signed right. a paper saying I wouldn't do it. I could have gone back on my word. I don't know legally what would have happened, but I didn't even care. Right. I mean, I was burned out. I wanted to do something else for a while. So now people see me doing more technology, and they're like, why are you doing this? Or they're excited mostly, but also it was always planned. Right. I was always going to do technology to some degree. But mod itself is, it's a broad term. I chose that on purpose because it means modification, which means you can modify anything. And that's kind of the point is right. I can build things from scratch, or I could take a phone and mod it to do something with it that I don't normally do, or something to that degree. But then Mod in a Box is different. It's a separate company, so it's not actually the same company at all, but it's a subscription box service based on the DIY projects I create on Mod. So they're very closely related, obviously, but very separate. So if you see a project that I do on the channel, you can usually, not yet, we're still kind of trying to get to the point where you can buy anything that I make on the channel on Mod in a Box, at modinabox.com. But we have a subscription box that you can actually subscribe to. I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
Where you can get 3 projects every month that I do. They're chosen by what I do on the channel that month or the previous month, and you can get them in the mail and then make them yourself. I do mostly little knickknacks. They're called mini mods for a reason. They're supposed to be quick and really small. And I've done things like keychains, wallets, a grid organizer, if anybody knows what a cocoon grid is. It's just an organizer you throw in a bag that holds things in place. I've done smartphone stands, tripod adapters for smartphones, a little bit of everything. I try to integrate technology a little bit. I made a flashlight, and the project I'm working on, it's Sunday, right? Yes.
Yes, this is a Sunday.
It's Sunday, so they're always released on Monday, Mini-Mod Monday. The project I'm doing tomorrow, which is weeks past by the time this goes live, but it's a solar charger for your phone. So solar panel, USB module, and some batteries.
So let's go back a little bit before we're at the part where we're assembling a lot of these projects with Mod. So you're disenfranchised from technology, and you decide to pick up on these breadcrumbs that had already been laid there, and you decide to make this your own. I know that there's a lot of podcasters listening to this show, and there may be many of them who would love to find a way to make that or some other passion of theirs their individual income. What are some of those first few steps that you went through getting your head around this leap you're about to make? Talk to me about that process.
The leap of leaving, or what?
Well, you've left.
Yeah,
and
okay.
Now you're like, how do I start to put these pieces together to go down this road?
I guess figure out what it is first that you want to do, your mission. What are your passions? And, I was fortunate enough to know exactly what I liked and what I wanted to do before I left, because I'd been thinking about it. Every day I'd log on or open up YouTube and I'd see Mod at Home just right there in front of me. And I'm like, I want to do something. So I had the luxury of, planning for a long time for that. But finding that was a complete and total accident. I was never going to do a Nexus 7 dash install until I bought the car that I got. And then it just kind of led to that. I'm like, hey, I can make videos about this. And then I was like, hey, what if I search DIY on YouTube? What pops up? About 400 pages of girls doing cell phone chargers in a Starbucks cup. That's your DIY.
With ramped up saturation and color, like you guys talked about on Untethered recently.
Yeah, it's a little frustrating, but it's that as well as makeup. It's mostly makeup, DIY makeup, and you search for. There are millions of search results, and most of them are makeup, and that there are about 3 or 4 large DIY channels, and one is Kip K, which he's pretty popular. Mm-hmm. He has like 2 million subscribers. There's Threadbanger, which is growing in popularity, and another, and they weren't that big, in 2013. So I didn't see much of anything. There's a little woodworking, but the DIY market on YouTube is underserved. It's barren, and I don't know if that's because people just don't care about it, or if because nobody stepped in to just take control. And when I realized that, I was like, I gotta do it. I like DIY. I know how to make videos, and it's underserved. So maybe I can just do something with that. And that's where I found my calling. I don't know if I can call it that yet, but
what was the plan to eat?
To pay the bills.
Yeah.
I reached out to a productivity app that I had done some videos on, Todoist. They have a really nice app, and I'd covered their app several times, and I realized that every time I said anything about their app, they would reach out to me and thank me and say they really enjoyed it. And I didn't get that. I covered a lot of apps and services in my day at Pocket Now and at PhoneDog, and nobody really reached out when I mentioned something about them. So the fact that Todoist did kind of lit a light bulb in my head. I'm like, hey, what if they want me to do videos for them? They have a blog and there's not a lot on there. So I was like, you guys, if you want me to make videos for you, because I'm leaving Pocket now, just I can work something out. And we came to an agreement, and, it didn't fully pay my bills, but between that and I moved in with my sister, which significantly cut my bills down, and little odds and ends, doing things like social media for someone, and I just kind of pulled a lot of different things together, and that's kind of where all of my business comes from now. I got into so many different things, it's hard to consolidate because, now I can consolidate, but that's thanks to an investor or a business partner in Mod in a Box. But at the time, I didn't really have a plan. It was, I know I'm leaving. I know that this job that I'm working 4 days a week covers about 90% of my bills, and that I don't have any running money, and I can't cover another 10%, but I'll figure it out. Right. And that was kind of my plan,
And some of this, not all of it, I know, because you mentioned some of the other things that you guys do on Untethered, but a lot of this has been discussed throughout the weeks and months of this transition for you guys. So has any part with your podcast been intentionally or unintentionally sort of documenting this process?
Totally unintentionally. We always, and I think it's because I'm the host, but we always end up talking about my move or what's happening or Mod in a Box or something. And I should probably, phase that out a little bit. I'm sure people are tired of hearing me complain about the heat up here in the Northeast, but which it's insanely hot. I did not expect that, but yeah, it's totally unintentional. I don't mean to talk about myself so much. It's usually, we talk about some really crazy stuff on Untethered, so maybe people are welcoming the change away from like weird live BDSM shows and stuff. Like we've hit pretty much everything you could ever imagine on the show. So I don't know, maybe people are welcoming it. I haven't heard anything bad about it. I don't think people are complaining, but
I think there's a voyeuristic nature about it. Startup from Gimlet Media. It's a huge show online right now. And I think there's an element of, and you guys have talked about this on shows that very often, this is technically your show, and you have regular guests and co-hosts. And a lot of the people who know who you are and have watched your career progress know what you're doing now and realize, and I sort of alluded to it a minute ago, this has been the consistent strain, right? Mm-hmm. During this transition, if you weren't sure where to find Taylor, you knew his podcast was a way to get an update, so to speak. Right. And I think that I would argue people are liking this more than not. Like, maybe you guys as a crew on the show maybe feel it's getting old.
Yeah, everybody's like, hey, stop talking about this.
Yeah, maybe that. And I could see that. But I think people who are listening, sort of in that startup Gimlet Media style, watching this progression. And I think that's why when you guys I would argue that these guys, your friends, on the show with you, sort of have the same component, that they are checking in, they're seeing the progress, they're wondering how things are going, because maybe, just maybe, in the back of their head, and I think a lot of us have that same feeling you were talking about of being your own boss and doing something that makes you happy. Well, there's kind of this guinea pig in front of us right now doing this process, so they want to know, so how's this going?
Yeah, maybe, yeah, and I think that has something to do with it. It's kind of like an audio blog. So vlogging is huge now. Casey Neistat is enormous on YouTube solely because he documents every single day of his life with a video. And I'm thinking maybe that mine's sort of like an audio version of that. I do vlogs as well, but they're more like to get a point out, like, hey, this is happening, here's your update. The vlog, or not the vlog, the podcast is, like I said, it's totally unintentional, and I think it comes up in conversation because it's not forced. It's just people are interested in what's happening, I think, at least to some degree.
Almost makes you wonder, is there a mod podcast in the future that could focus solely on mod's progress?
Well, we were going to do the mod pod, and I think that's taken. It's something from UK, and then there was another that I'd come up with, another name. But we had actually put Untethered on mod for a while. On the YouTube channel because people asked for it, but they're kind of separate entities now. So maybe there's some room for another podcast, but right now I don't have time.
And all your free time, Taylor.
I actually started a YouTube channel last weekend because I'm a moron. I'm a moron.
Wait, was this the one-word reviews, right?
Yes.
Tell folks about this. I want folks to hear about this.
I've been talking about doing a one-word review for like technology and just any item in the world. Just a one-word review, because there are items that just come out. I remember doing it several times with the iPhone and Samsung. They released this, and then I would tweet Samsung Galaxy S2 one-word review. No. And people loved it. Like, those were like the most retweeted tweets I ever had. And I was like, you know what? That's a cool idea. I think it's stupid, but it's also kind of funny, and people would enjoy it. And that was the idea. And Dom, who's regularly on the podcast, he has his own YouTube channel and his own podcast. He's actually, I think he might be the host of 9 to 5, their new podcast.
Oh, okay. Esposito, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
Dom Esposito. And he's like, dude, do it. Do a one-word review, or I'm going to do it. And I'm like, okay. So it's kind of this like side project that when I have free time, I'll make a one-word review. And the premise there is that they're funny, they're kind of interesting, just to see what I can come up with. And then, the time invested in it is minimal.
Right.
It's a one-word review. All of the videos are planned to be under 5 seconds, but that still takes like an hour of work.
And this is totally Instagram material as well.
It is Instagram or Vine material.
Vine, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I did realize that. I'm like, hey, I should put these up on Vine or somewhere, because that's a huge platform. Although I hate Vine, and I think most Vines are really not funny at all. I think it's a place to put them.
Absolutely. And I think it's, you have, at the time of the recording, there's one?
One.
I've seen the one, yes.
There's another that I made and edited and then did not finish, because the struggle with that.
You couldn't decide on the word?
Yeah. It's only one word. That's a lot more difficult than you think it is. I mean, I can only say no so many times. The point is that there is a certain aspect of it that's like acting.
Right.
You have to do some degree of voice acting to get the message right. You can't just say no. You have to make it interesting.
Right.
And like,
the first one wasn't even a word per se, right?
It's in Urban Dictionary. It has many meanings.
And folks, a link to this Taylor's side project will also be in the show notes as well as links to Mod and Untethered. Check the show notes. As always, guys, you will see all of that in there. So I wanted to talk a little bit about something, Taylor, that you touched on a recent Untethered, and I wanted to explore just a little bit more because, as I mentioned, a lot of podcasters listen, and some of the ones may be starting to see some of this, the pros, cons, the experience, if you will, of being an internet personality. Now, I know that there are bigger ones than you, let's say,
yeah.
right?
Oh, yes.
Millions of bigger ones.
I'm a tiny fish in a very big pond.
But at least from your time at Phone Dog and at Pocket Now, being a part of a larger organization, you obviously had your work scrutinized by all kinds of walks of people.
I've had YouTube commenters tell me to jump off a bridge, to off myself in as many ways as you can imagine, tell me that I should be fired. And then also, the opposite of that, some of the best praise I could ever imagine. And
I've talked about this with some of the podcasters previously on previous episodes of the Podcast Digest about getting a negative review in iTunes. And they've talked about how that impacts them and how they move forward in this, that, and the other. But what you've been through is wildly, it doesn't even scale. We're talking about much greater in terms of what's been said, so to speak. What is this like? You must have developed the thickest skin.
Well, I developed that as a child, honestly. But actually, before I get to that, the only negative review that my podcast has ever gotten on iTunes was due to Dustin's voice. That was it.
Really? One of your co-hosts?
So, yeah, he is the staple co-host. They don't like his voice, so they give me a 1-star in iTunes.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the point. Like, that's something you can't change.
Right.
So, and that's kind of how it is with most of the negative comments that I've gotten. One of the first videos I ever did for Phone Dog, it got like 500 comments because it was the first time I showed my face, and people knew that Aaron Baker was leaving the company. And at one point, he was much heavier than he is now. He lost like 80, 90, 100 pounds. And I was kind of heavier. You know, I'm still not a skinny guy, but I was heavier than I am now. And of those 500 comments, I would say there were probably 300 that asked me if I ate him. What is this fat lard doing on the channel? I mean, you can go back. They're terrible. But my thick skin came from when I was a child. I didn't have friends all through elementary school. I had one friend who was in the hospital 90% of the time. And in middle school, I kind of made some friends, but I was big. I was pudgy. My nickname this was from my sister. She made this up and it spread throughout the school. Big white fluffy marshmallow.
Wow.
She was really kind to me.
Thanks, sis.
Yeah, thank you. But just things like that, I guess. At that point, I was like, if they're not going to like me just for me, then, screw them. I'll do my own thing. And that's just kind of how it's always been. And now comments just roll off my back. I don't really get negative comments on my channel anymore. It's like most of the comments I've realized, especially on technology videos, come from people who are driven by the products that they like.
Right.
So if I'm reviewing the iPhone and they hate the iPhone, then they're going to call me an iPhone guy. If I call
Doesn't matter what you say or the video or anything else. Right?
No, nothing I've said matters. It's the iPhone. They don't like it. I'm talking about it, so I'm a fanboy.
Right.
And rather, if they like the G4 and I've given it a poor review because they've either bought it and they want to validate their purchase through my opinion, or because they actually disagree with me, whatever it may be, it doesn't really matter. If they like it and I don't, I'm stupid and I should kill myself. And that's kind of the product of anonymity on the internet. You don't have to, stand up behind what you've said. You're behind a keyboard. There is no repercussion for being mean on the internet. And that's really all it is. They're mean because they can be. There's no consequence for that. And also because they don't understand the work that goes into it, whether it's a podcast, an editorial that I've written, or a long video that took me 15 hours and they thought it took me 30 minutes.
If you had to give anyone who is breaking into an internet life, they're just starting a podcast, they're just starting a blog, whatever the case may be, they're putting themselves out there for the first time, and they come across a negative review, commentary, whatever. What advice would you give to those guys?
Do not give it any sort of thought. That's the best thing you can do. Is if it's a valid criticism, it's usually not terribly mean. People are nice about true constructive criticism. Like, hey, I liked your video, but you could do this better. I've gotten plenty of those. But if it's, you're a moron, get off the internet, it's just some 15-year-old who's probably angry because he can't leave his basement because he got grounded or something. I don't know. But
right.
It's just, there's only so much, not so much. Just take it with a grain of salt. If it's a valid criticism, then, use it to your advantage. Learn from it. If it's just some blatant mean comment for no reason, then it's some moron on the internet who doesn't know, even the least bit of courtesy or manners. So
that's the negative side, if you will, the crap that people who are putting creative work out on the internet have to deal with. What about the other side? What about the good things that have come from, there are in technology circles anyways, there are a lot of people who know your name. What are some of the benefits of having your work be recognized, be shared, so on and so forth? What's the flip side of the coin?
The gratitude. I mean, not the gratitude. You feel a sense of gratitude when you've put 10 hours into a video and people share it and say they like it and you should go check this out. There's nothing that feels better than that. And the camaraderie. When you start making videos and people start liking it, and then those people start recognizing you, especially if they're people you don't already know, it feels amazing. Because people that I've watched their videos forever, and they share my videos. I'm like, wow, that's really neat. I don't know this person. They found me, and that's really cool. So there's a lot of stuff like that. But then there is a lot of positivity on the internet. You just have to find it. I've been fortunate enough to weed out all the negative people from Pocket Now and my past, I guess. My like to dislike ratio on my YouTube channel is insanely positive. It's like 98, 99% most of the time, like to dislike. And then when you see things like that, it's uplifting, I mean, what could make you feel better than people liking the work that you put your whole entire heart and life into? And then when you make friends through that, those are lifelong friends.
Right.
People that you fly and have an experience in Berlin with. I mean, how many times are you going to go to Berlin in your life? Unless you move there or something. But,
right.
And then you spend a week with these people in a foreign country doing things like eating McDonald's on a subway when you're not supposed to with... Have you ever been to Berlin?
No.
McDonald's there is very strange because they have chicken sandwiches, but they put... it's like a ketchup on it, but it's currywurst. It's the sauce they use from their currywurst, which is basically like ketchup and hot dogs just chopped up.
Interesting.
It's very strange. Oh, no, that wasn't on the chicken sandwich. They have a currywurst sandwich, but they also have the chicken sandwich comes with like salsa on it.
Oh.
Yeah,
okay.
And they serve beer at McDonald's. Like it's just
I know about the beer. I've been to London and Madrid, and I do recall beer at McDonald's. Yes.
Right. So I mean, it's just experiences like that I'll never forget, and those are the things that I'm extremely thankful for from being in this industry. I would never have experienced anything like that before, or otherwise.
Right, and I think a lot of podcasters can relate to that. People talk about all the time what having their own show has allowed them to do, or in your case, your experience of technology or the YouTube channel. And I've already talked about it with these guys many times in terms of already in less than a year, the conversations I've been able to have with folks. You know, I mean, I mentioned to you when you first arrived here today, you know, I watched your videos 2-3 years ago for Pocket Now. You know, I've read your stuff back when I was in Virginia Beach, and I never even dreamed of having a podcast. I'm just a podcast listener. And now 2 or 3 years later, we're sitting here in my house having this conversation. So that in and of itself for me is something that, you know, is the positive side of that creative endeavor, because while there is some crap that comes along with it, and I've talked about it in previous episodes, there is that positive side that, like you said, how could have it happened otherwise? Right.
And that's one of the best things about the internet, I think, is that through the internet we can meet some people that we would have never known without it. You know, right. And things like this do happen, and it's all about making the best of all the good times. And the same as, you know, dealing with long, terrible days, just like any other job. You have to see the light in all of it. And that is, like I said, the camaraderie, meeting people, making friends that you would not have ever met otherwise. And I've been fortunate enough to make dozens of them. You know, I can fly to almost any state in the United States and meet up with someone that I've, you know, met through my work, which is insane.
That's an awesome feeling. Yeah.
I moved to Pennsylvania. I have several friends who live in New York that I didn't know before this. I have a friend who actually lives in Philly, and friends in Arizona, San Francisco, everywhere, Montana, like just the states you never think of, even in other countries. And that is kind of awesome. I can go anywhere and just visit a friend.
There's a lot of good stuff, I think, that has happened when you take this road, this journey, and where you are and where you end up. And I want to go back and talk a little bit more about where you are. I want to talk about Mod a little bit more, because I want folks to kind of get an idea of sort of this road we've been describing and talking about, where you are on it right now. So if folks go to the website that's going to be in the show notes, what are they going to see there? What are they going to find? What type of things? You know, you've talked about videos and the monthly stuff, but what else are they going to find there? What type of person needs to go and check this stuff out?
Everyone, of course. Right?
Of course.
Well, my actual website is kind of barren these days because it's just fallen to the wayside. So the YouTube channel is kind of the main place to go, but I cover everything from productivity and kind of efficiency, so covering apps that'll make you better at whatever it is that you want to do, DIY projects, and technology. The video I did yesterday was what's on my Nexus 6, because literally hundreds of people have been begging for me to make that video, and I'm like, I'll make it. I finally did yesterday. But anybody who wants to learn how to just see the world, and this sounds cliche and stupid, but to see the world in a different way, because I see things on the internet and in person and everywhere, and I'm like, hey, that's really cool, but I'm not going to spend $50 on that. And that was kind of where the idea of mini mods was born. You know, I see an item and I'm like, hey, I really like that, and then I see the price tag. I'm like, no. So I'm like, I can definitely make that. And that was kind of, as much as I hate to say it, I am my dad. Because when I was a kid, I would be in the store and I'm like, hey, Dad, can I get that? And he's like, no, I can make that. I'm sure a lot of people can relate.
Right.
But that kind of, I guess, seeped down into me, and now I see things, and I'm like, I can make that. And that's what I do. I see something I really like, and I make it. And one of the things that I found first was a keychain. It's just a keychain. It's a leather keychain that uses an HK clip from a gunsling. And I was like, that looks really cool. I'll buy one of those. I found it online. It was $40 for a 2-inch long keychain that's just a little piece of leather and an HK clip. And I'm like, no way. There is no way that's going to happen.
You could make a 12-pack for $40.
Right. And that's what I did. I made 12 for not even $40. And I was like, wow, I could turn this into a series. And now that's what I do. So if you want to take the things you see in everyday life and make them yourself, I mean, obviously you can't make everything yourself.
Right.
You're not going to make a computer monitor from scratch or a really nice condenser mic. Maybe you could. I'm sure you could. Somebody had to make one themselves at one point, And that's the point, is I'm kind of learning as I go. That's kind of how I've always done everything. When I started writing about phones, I was terrible. I didn't know what I was doing. And it was my knowledge that got me into it. I knew BlackBerries like the back of my hand. Somebody realized that and worked with me on my writing. And I didn't know anything about podcasting when I started. Nothing. I started Untethered in 2009 or 2010 as Phone Dog's podcast. Because they had a podcast, it went away, and I'm like, let's do something different. And I named it Untethered. We did like 4 episodes, and then they were like, you're wasting too much time. Stop this. So I'm like, okay, I'll take the name that I came up with and use it again, because I liked it so much. I didn't know anything about podcasting then. And same with videos. When I started, I had no knowledge of video, no photography knowledge, no videography knowledge, no audio knowledge. And I just learned. And the entire time I basically would watch videos that I made and critique myself and make everything that I've ever made better the next time. So whether it's an article, a video, a podcast, I try to do better every time. I think the most difficult out of all of those is making the podcast better every time. Because it's not something I'm 100% totally in control of. But every time I try to make something that I do better. And that's kind of where I am now with mod. Every time I make one of these objects, it's better than the last. Every time I make something new, I'm kind of starting over at square one, but I'm learning how to work with different materials as I go. And the more I learn about those materials, the better I can be. And sort of my inspiration, and a lot of people know this, is Adam Savage from Mythbusters and Tested. He's brilliant. He works with anything and everything you can throw at him. You could throw it like you could probably throw adamantium at him and he would know what to do with it. And that's kind of where and what I want to be eventually.
And you talked about mod kind of evolving, and it intentionally, you left doors open for coverage and going down different. You talked about, apps and productivity and things of that nature. Are there any other areas that you see that you may possibly look into or considering going into?
I don't know. When I created mod, I chose the name. A lot of people asked why I didn't just start my own channel, Taylor Martin, because YouTube rolled that thing out where you can use your own name.
Right.
MKBHD went to Marquez Brownlee, TLD Today, Jonathan Morrison. Everybody started using their own name, so they were synonymous with their channel. And I didn't want that, because eventually I think my plan for mod is, if I can grow it enough, I want it to be a business. I want it to be like the Pocket Now of DIY.
Right.
Which is, what is out there like that? There's not a ton. There's like the DIY Network, which is really good at TV, right, but their internet presence isn't so hot. So I kind of want to pioneer that to a degree. And that's the plan, is to grow it into something, maybe home improvement. That's always going to be something that people want to see.
Right, and that's sort of what I was asking. When you talk about modifying something, I mean, modify blank. You could put almost anything behind there.
That's why I chose mod. Right. Most people don't get that. They're like, mod.
You talked about Nexus 6, so it's almost like modifying your Nexus 6. You talked about productivity, ways to modify your behaviors or your patterns or whatever the case might be. I mean, you really could go anywhere. You could almost have teams or divisions or different focus areas on what you could mod.
Yeah, and part of that could be a fault. I could be opening Pandora's box for anything and everything to go wrong. But I think the point is now I'm starting small. I'm keeping it the way it is for now. Slowly adding in things that people want to see. I know people want to see me do technology. They were upset when I left, and I do one review, and everybody's like, "Oh my God, he's back!" And it's nice to be back, but the focus is still DIY.
Right.
Technology will be in there. I'll work it in when I can, but it's DIY.
So one of the target demos, and like you said, everyone, but one of them may be that person who wants to potentially save money, somebody who is a tinkerer. My son was a huge Lego kid growing up. Not so much anymore, but now he's still a creative guy. He still likes to draw and paint and things of that nature. So a creative, maybe a tinkerer, those type of folks, people who maybe were looking to save money, so on and so forth, right?
Yeah, and especially the not so lazy people.
Right.
Because the funniest thing is people who have signed up for Mod in a Box, they get 3 kits for DIY projects in the mail. I do about 50 to 60% of the work. I'm cutting up all the stuff. I'm soldering people or things for people. I'm doing a lot of the work for the people, and they get the projects in the mail, and they're like, I didn't do the projects. Okay, so you have to kind of want to do things, and part of it is I hate being lazy. I hate laying around and not doing anything, and I fill my time with what is considered work technically, but it doesn't feel like it. And that's something that I didn't mention earlier when I was talking about how I work really long days, a lot. Since I've come here or moved to Pennsylvania, I've probably had 3 days off total, and I've been here a month and a half or longer. I don't know exactly, but I don't feel like I'm working nonstop. It's, a lot of the work I do. The podcast is fun. Building things is fun. Cutting things with my saw, whether I'm doing it, I cut something 500 times, it's still fun,
right.
And that's part of how I probably should have answered what you asked about people like finding their own thing to do on the internet. If you can find something that's fun to do and doesn't feel like work, sometimes it's going to feel like work. When you don't want to be doing it, it's going to feel like work. But a lot of the other time, it doesn't.
And the benefit is benefiting you.
Right.
Instead of a larger company or organization or what. It sounds like to me, tell me if I'm right on this or if I'm close. Ballpark.
I'm not selfish.
No. If I'm closer on the ballpark on this, it's kind of like the difference between renting and buying a home. My brother, who is in his mid-30s, just bought his first home after 18 years as a renter. And I've been trying to tell him for a long time to do it because I'm telling him, basically, you're throwing your money away every month. It's not doing anything for you. Whereas owning, of course, you get the tax benefits and the credit benefits and so on and so forth. It's sort of
your monthly payments are lower.
Yeah, so often.
For the same thing.
So it's like your money's working for you and you're not giving it to somebody else. Is that a fair parallel?
Yeah, because I've been with several companies in this industry, and one of the most insane things to me, and it's not so bad these days because ad revenues are kind of up and down. They're all over the place right now. But one thing that was really, that kind of sparked that entrepreneurship idea in my mind when I was 19 and starting all this was I work just as much as some of my superiors, and I make a third of what they make, or a fourth, or a fifth. I mean, it's insane. I'm working 80 hours a week and making a fifth of what they're making. And they're working, 60, 50. And that's not the way to look at it. That's not how you're supposed to look at it. They've worked harder or not harder, but just as hard for much longer. It's a seniority thing, but it's also terrible when you experience something kind of like I did. A lot of people said I got Conan'd. I was offered a promotion and a raise. It was a very nice raise, and I saw a very, very nice future for myself. And 2 weeks later, I got demoted. It was nothing I did. It was something that the person who promoted me did. They came back to the company. I got demoted and went back to my old pay, and I was like, there's no way. You cannot dangle that carrot in somebody's face and then expect them to be okay with going back to how things were.
That kind of sounds like Conan, actually.
Right.
It's kind of a good parallel.
Right. So after seeing that and seeing the disparity in the pay, it was never okay with me. I knew that I was making decent money, and I was 19. I didn't have a degree. I was making more money than my mom, who has a master's, and I was okay. But after seeing how crazy and unbalanced these companies were, I was just like, I can't. I got to do it for myself. And it's not about the money. It's just about the principle behind everything that I'm doing. I'm doing all of this work for page views and clicks and everything when I should be doing it because I enjoy it and I love the work that I'm doing. And now I don't worry about views. I don't worry about how many subscribers I have. I don't worry about anything, just making content. And that's really all I ever wanted it to be about.
One more thing just jumped in my head that I wanted to mention. We talked about this before we hit the record button a little bit, but I was just reminded when you were saying about how much you're putting into it and that pay is not necessarily, the thing that drives the choice, but that personal sense of satisfaction. I've had a life where I've worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs at different times, and I know what it's like to have 50, 60, 70-hour work weeks and start to question what it is that you're really gaining out of it. Interestingly, now you talked about, especially after the relocation, that your other half, if you will, your significant other, your girlfriend, is helping you with this. So in your previous life, your technology life, I imagine there wasn't much else in life, so to speak, like a social life or time to yourself or whatever the case may be. Now, working for Mod, yourself, so to speak, you're able to bring those close to you kind of in it a little bit.
Yeah, to a degree. I actually had more of a social life before.
Oh, yeah. Just in colleagues in the industry, you mean?
Well, no, I mean, even local friends. We would go out. We had this thing. We'd always go out on the weekends, and now I don't have that because I don't really know much of anybody up here. But I've also been working more because I've kind of shot myself in the foot by doing so many different things. But I'm okay with that. But yes, I can bring my family into it and friends. And my friend visited for one day. He flew or drove up from North Carolina. He was going to stay with his family. And he came in, we went to dinner, came back, and we packed boxes.
Until got some work out of it.
Until like 1 a.m. So, yeah, they get a chance to actually experience what it is I'm doing for the first time. Because when I was making videos about phones, they're like, oh, he's just reviewing another phone, whatever. And now they're like, oh, he's literally slaving over these boxes for 20 hours straight. And they get to experience it and understand it a little better. But a lot of them still question it. They're like, what are you even doing? Why are you packing boxes? Why are you soldering like 500 times in a day? What do you do? I don't understand. So it's kind of not much has changed. One thing changes and then something else does. So it's kind of maybe the polar opposite, but still.
Well, it has been an interesting journey on the other end of my earbuds, especially through Untethered over the past couple of months, kind of hearing the progress. And that is one check-in point, Untethered, the link in the show notes, guys, to continue to watch Taylor's journey here. But there are many, many other places on the web where you and your work can be found. Tell folks where that is.
Well, obviously the YouTube channel that I run, or the YouTube channels now, I guess.
Channels.
Why did I do that? Yes, one is youtube.com/mod@home, and the other is One Word Reviews. There's no vanity URL. Google changed that.
Yeah.
You can't get it until you have 500 subscribers.
So, folks,
just Google it.
And Google it and then subscribe so he can get to 500.
Yeah, there we go. That's a good idea.
Please. That'll be the one word.
Please. And then Untethered is pretty much, it's untetheredcast.com. That's the easiest way to find it. And I also do stuff on Todoist, blog.todoist.com. A lot of the content there is my videos. What am I forgetting?
You're on Twitter, I've heard.
I am on Twitter. That's like, it used to be my second home. I'm a little more quiet on there, but I'm at Casper Tech on Twitter. I don't really post on Google Plus, and Facebook is Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram. Same thing, Casper Tech.
The one-word videos, you may see some there.
Yeah,
in the future.
That'd be great.
So, for sure. Well, Taylor, as we wrap this up, I can't thank you enough for We talked about it before. This was literally started as a blind Twitter conversation and email, and Taylor, out of the blind goodness of his heart, decided to come to my house to record with me. We had never met before an hour and a half ago, and so I appreciate you taking the chance. And like I said, I listened to you for a long time on Pocket Now Weekly and then on Untethered, and watched a ton of videos. And to have you join me here is a real honor. It's been great, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And hopefully I was a little more tame than I was on Pocket Now. I was wild. I was out of control.
You were a wonderful compliment on those shows, and I think, and I've said this to Michael Fisher himself when I had him on the show. I think after you left, the show took a hit, and I think that you and Michael's interaction and banter made that show so listenable and so enjoyable to a lot of the regular listeners like myself. And while I think since then Michael and Steven have really built their own banner and back and forth, it took a while. And I think that they were trying to recreate and rekindle what you and Michael had for a long time. And I know I'm not just speaking for myself. I know there are a lot of other people out there. So I think you were a great addition to that roster. And I love what you're doing now with Untethered and Mod. And I wish you all the best of luck. And I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Well, thank you.
Cool.
Thanks.
Well, folks, thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Podcast Digest. I hope you enjoyed. Check the show notes for all the links that Taylor has mentioned to the YouTube channel and the Twitter, multiple YouTube channels. It'll all be right there, folks. Until next time, this is Dan Lizette with the Podcast Digest. And take care.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Digest. You can follow the show on Twitter at PodDigest. Like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Podcast Digest. Email the show feedback at thepodcastdigest@gmail.com. And you can find all the previous episodes and exclusive blog entries at the show's website, thepodcastdigest.info.